The Willow Creek farm has been in my family for nearly 60 years. Every ridge, every furrow, every fence post tells a story of sacrifice and dedication. I inherited the 20 acres from my father, who worked himself to exhaustion building something that would last. It was on this land that I built my life with Margaret, my late wife. We cultivated not just crops, but memories. The old oak by the creek where I proposed. The eastern field where we picnicked during harvest moons. Margaret has been gone for 3 years now, but this land keeps her alive in ways photographs cannot. Our neighborhood used to be entirely rural, farmers and landowners who understood boundaries and respect. We borrowed tools, not territory. We shared advice, not entitlement. But progress came eventually, as it always does. The Meadow Springs development broke ground across the road 5 years ago. 48 luxury homes with manicured lawns crammed into what used to be the old Jenkins property. I did not mind at first. Change happens. People need places to live. The homeowners association kept to themselves initially. They had their rules, their committees, their scheduled waste removal that made my old pickup truck trips to the dump seem primitive. I noticed their subtle glances when they drove past my weathered barn or the seasonal equipment parked near my property edge. But we coexisted peacefully, like neighboring countries with different customs but mutual respect. That changed when Karen Whitfield became HOA president. I remember the day I first saw her properly. She was standing at their community entrance, clipboard in hand, inspecting the stone sign with its golden lettering. Everything about her was immaculate. Her cream-colored blazer, her perfectly styled blonde hair, the way she pointed at imaginary flaws that needed immediate correction. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. The first intrusion happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. I was fixing the fence on the north side when I spotted it. A gleaming white Range Rover parked clearly on my side of the property line. Not by inches, by yards. I took a deep breath and walked over, finding Karen sitting inside, talking on her phone through her car's Bluetooth system. When she saw me, she held up one perfectly manicured finger, signaling me to wait while she finished her conversation about seasonal planters for the community entrance. "Excuse me," I said when she finally rolled down her window. "This is private property, my property." Karen looked at me with mild surprise, as if I had pointed out something as trivial as a butterfly landing nearby. "Oh, is it? I thought this was the community overflow area." "No, this is my farm. The property line is back there." I pointed to the clear markers that had stood for decades. She glanced in that direction without interest. "Well, there is not any clear signage. How would anyone know? Besides, I'm just parking here temporarily while I supervise the mailbox installation." She gestured toward the development entrance. "It does not matter if it is temporary. This is private property, not public parking." Karen sighed as if dealing with a child who did not understand basic concepts. "Look, we are all neighbors here. The HOA manages all the land that borders our development for community use. It is in our charter." "That is not accurate. Your HOA has no authority over my land." She gave me a dismissive wave of her hand. "I will move in a bit. No need to make this into a federal case." With that, she rolled up her window and resumed her phone call. I stood there, suddenly feeling like a stranger on my own property. Her car remained for another 2 hours before she finally left, leaving behind tire impressions in my soil. No apology, no acknowledgement. That night, as I sat on my porch looking out over the fields Margaret and I had cultivated together, something unsettling took root in my chest. The casual dismissal, the assumption of right, the complete disregard. It was not just about a car, it was about something deeper. A boundary had been crossed, and not just the physical one marked by survey stakes and legal documents. I tried to shake it off. One incident, one entitled person, not worth disrupting my peace, not worth the energy. But as I watched the lights of the Meadow Springs homes glowing across the way, I could not shake the feeling that this was merely the opening move in a game I never agreed to play. The quiet of early mornings had always been sacred to me. That precious time when the world holds its breath before the day begins in earnest. Margaret and I would sit together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb over the eastern tree line, painting the dew-covered fields in gold. Now I sat alone with my coffee, but those moments still connected me to her. That serenity began to fracture 3 weeks after the Range Rover incident. I was startled by the sound of not one but several engines idling near my property edge. Setting down my mug, I walked to the porch railing to find 5 vehicles parked in a neat row on my land. All expensive, all gleaming, all where they should not be. I pulled on my boots and marched across the field. A small gathering of well-dressed men and women stood between the cars, paper cups in hand, chatting amiably. At the center was Karen, wearing a pink cardigan that matched the roses pinned to her lapel. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "This is private property. You cannot park here." Karen turned, recognition flickering across her face before being replaced with a practiced smile. "Good morning. We are just having our HOA quarterly meeting breakfast. We will be out of your hair in an hour or two." "That is not the issue. You are trespassing on private property, all of you." A tall man in a golf shirt stepped forward. Karen said this was the community overflow parking area. "She is mistaken," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "This is my farm. It has been in my family for 60 years. It is not HOA property." Karen stepped forward, coffee cup delicately poised between her fingers. Now, let us not make a mountain out of a molehill. The development clearly has easement rights to adjoining properties for community functions. It is standard practice." "That is simply not true," I countered. "There are no easements on my property deeded to your HOA, none." She smiled at the group as if I was an amusing local character they needed to humor. "We contribute significantly to the local tax base and community improvement. A little neighborly accommodation is not too much to ask, is it? Especially since this land is just sitting here unused at the moment." My hands clenched involuntarily. Unused? This is productive farmland, and regardless of what I do or do not plant here, it is my property, not community parking. Karen's smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened. "We will be done by noon. I promise we will leave everything exactly as we found it." Before I could respond, she turned away, effectively dismissing me on my own land. The group followed her lead, resuming their conversations as if I had already left. I stood there, invisible yet exposed, anger building in my chest. Over the following weeks, Karen's encroachment grew bolder. The HOA spring wine mixer, the community yard sale preparation meeting, the architectural review committee gathering. Each event brought more cars, more strangers, more disregard. My land had become their convenience, my protests nothing but background noise. I tried installing simple fence posts with rope to mark the boundary clearly. The next morning, they were pulled out and tossed aside. I put up "no trespassing" signs. They disappeared within days. Each act of defiance on my part was met with escalation on hers. The isolation grew palpable. Neighbors from the development who once waved now averted their eyes when passing. One evening, Mark Wilson, who lived at the edge of the development closest to my property, approached me as I checked my mailbox. "You know, you are really bringing down neighborhood property values with this attitude," he said, hands in his pockets. "What attitude? Protecting my private property." Mark shook his head. "Look, Karen is just trying to build community. Fighting her on these little things makes everyone uncomfortable. Why not just be flexible? It is not like you are using that strip of land for anything important." "It is the principle," I insisted. "That land is mine." "Principles do not make good neighbors," he replied before walking away. That night I began documenting everything. Dates, times, license plate numbers, photographs. What had started as annoyance had evolved into something more systematic, more intentional. This was no longer about parking. It was about power, about who would yield and who would stand firm. I watched from my window as headlights swept across my fields, illuminating the tire tracks that now permanently scarred the eastern edge of my property. The land Margaret and I had nurtured was being slowly claimed, not by nature, but by entitlement, by people who saw boundaries as suggestions rather than laws. Someone had to push back, and there was no one left but me. There is a difference between anger and resolve. Anger burns hot but exhausts itself quickly. Resolve smolders, building strength over time. I had moved beyond anger weeks ago. What I felt now was determination, cold and focused. The breaking point came on a Saturday in late spring. I woke to the sound of vehicles, not just a few, but a stream of them. From my bedroom window, I watched in disbelief as car after car pulled onto my property. Not just along the edge this time, but deep into my eastern field. The field where I had just planted corn 3 weeks earlier. I dressed quickly and rushed outside. A large banner hung between two portable poles at the entrance to the development. Meadow Springs Welcome Spring Gala. Smaller signs with arrows directed overflow parking onto my land as if it was an official lot. Karen stood near the entrance in a floral dress, greeting guests and pointing them toward my property when the development's small parking area filled up. Her face lit up with each new arrival, completely unconcerned about where they were leaving their vehicles. I approached quickly, my patience long expired. "What do you think you are doing? You have absolutely no right to direct people onto my property." Karen's smile dimmed slightly but did not disappear. "Good morning to you too. It is just for today. We have over 60 guests coming and we need the space." "I do not care if the entire county is coming. This is private property. Those cars are driving over my crops." She glanced dismissively toward the field. "Crops, it just looks like dirt to me." "Because the corn is just sprouting. You are destroying 3 weeks of work." Karen sighed dramatically, as if I was deliberately ruining her day. "Look, this arrangement has been working fine. Why are you suddenly being so hostile to community harmony? The Homeowners Association contributes significantly to local property values, including yours. A little cooperation would be appreciated." "Cooperation requires consent. I never consented to this. Get those cars off my land, now." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Or what?" The challenge hung in the air between us. I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's department. 20 minutes later, Deputy Collins arrived. I recognized him from high school, though we had never been close. I explained the situation, showed him the property markers, presented my deed. He nodded sympathetically but looked uncomfortable. "I understand the issue, but this is really a civil matter, not criminal. Unless there is damage or threats, there is not much I can do besides ask them to move." "They are damaging my crops," I insisted. "That would be a civil claim. You would need to document the damage and file accordingly." Karen approached, all smiles and charm. "Officer, we are just having a community event. No one is causing any trouble. Everything will be back to normal by evening." Deputy Collins looked between us, clearly wanting to avoid conflict. "Sir, my suggestion is to document any damage for civil court if you want to pursue that route. Ma'am, you should be aware that if this is indeed private property, you could potentially be liable for damages." With that tepid response, he departed, leaving me exactly where I started. Karen watched him leave, then turned to me with an unmistakable smirk. "See, even the police understand community needs. You should try it sometime." She walked away, leaving me standing alone as more cars continued to arrive, their tires crushing the delicate corn sprouts beneath. That evening, after the guests had finally departed, I surveyed the damage. Tire tracks crisscrossed the field. My irrigation pipes, carefully laid just days before, were cracked and broken in multiple places. Empty wine glasses and paper plates had blown across the land. I took photographs of everything, my hands shaking not with rage but with determination. This was the final straw. If traditional authorities would not help, I would need to find another way. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, researching property law until my eyes burned. I read about civil trespass, about liability for property damage, about HOA limitations and boundaries. I discovered that HOAs had specific jurisdictional limits defined in their founding documents. They could not simply claim authority over neighboring properties. I dug deeper into local ordinances, into precedent cases, into the legal remedies available to landowners faced with persistent trespass. Each article, each legal forum post, each statute added another piece to the puzzle. By dawn, my kitchen table was covered in printouts, and my mind was clear. Karen had been playing a game without rules, but there were rules. There were always rules. She had just assumed I would never learn them. That morning, standing on my porch as the sun rose over my damaged field, I made a decision. This was no longer about preventing the next intrusion. This was about making sure there would never be another one. Karen wanted a fight. I was finally ready to give her one. Strategy requires patience. In farming, you learn that nothing worthwhile happens overnight. Seeds need time to germinate. Roots need time to strengthen. Harvest comes only after months of careful tending. My plan to reclaim my land would require the same deliberate approach. My first step was documentation. I purchased 4 high-quality wildlife cameras, the kind hunters use to track deer movements, and installed them in inconspicuous locations along my property line. They were motion-activated, weatherproof, and positioned to capture clear views of any vehicles entering my land. Next came the legal groundwork. I drove into the city and met with James Harrington, an attorney who specialized in property disputes. His office was modest but organized, much like the man himself. So your neighbor's HOA is essentially treating your land as an extension of their property, he summarized after I explained the situation. Exactly, despite multiple verbal warnings. James leaned back in his chair. And there is nothing in writing from you formally objecting to this use. No, nothing formal yet, just face-to-face requests. He nodded thoughtfully. Then that is where we start. A formal cease and desist letter puts everyone on notice that permission is explicitly denied. After that, any entrance onto your property is clearly willful trespass. 2 days later, I stood at my mailbox holding the certified letter James had prepared. It was precise, professional, and unambiguous. The HOA and its president were formally notified that any use of my property was expressly prohibited. Any vehicles, structures, signs, or persons found on my land without written permission would constitute trespass. I hand-delivered copies to Karen's house and the HOA office, ensuring both were properly served. I also installed large, no trespassing, signs at regular intervals along my property line, each one clearly visible and legally compliant. The foundation was laid. Karen's response came swiftly and predictably. She appeared at my door the very next evening, letter in hand, her expression a mixture of amusement and irritation. Really, legal threats? That is how you want to handle this? She held up the cease and desist letter. It is not a threat, it is a formal notification. She laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Do you have any idea how petty this makes you look? We are talking about a strip of unused land that benefits the entire community when we use it occasionally. It is my land, Karen, not the community's, not yours. She folded the letter deliberately and tucked it into her purse. You know, I was going to invite you to our summer barbecue next weekend. A chance to actually be part of something instead of that hermit act you have going on, but I can see you are determined to be difficult. Just respecting the property line will be sufficient. Karen's smile tightened. The HOA board meets tomorrow. I will be sure they hear all about this. Overreaction, good evening. As she walked away, I felt no anger, no anxiety, only certainty. The trap was set. Now I just needed Karen to spring it herself. I did not have to wait long. The following weekend brought the summer barbecue she had mentioned. By mid-morning, cars again began appearing on my property, ignoring both the legal notices and the no trespassing signs. More vehicles than ever before. From my porch, I watched through binoculars as Karen personally directed traffic, pointing drivers onto my land with emphatic gestures. I documented everything. Each car, each license plate, the time of arrival, the position relative to my property markers. The cameras captured it all in high-definition clarity. When the event was in full swing, I walked the perimeter, taking additional photographs and noting the damaged irrigation equipment. Several guests looked uncomfortable when they saw me documenting their vehicles, but Karen quickly intercepted. Do not mind him, she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. He likes to pretend this is some sort of violation, just enjoy the party. I said nothing, simply continued my documentation. By evening, when the last car finally left, I had collected overwhelming evidence of willful, deliberate trespass following explicit prohibition. The next morning, I contacted my insurance company to file a claim for the property damage. I submitted all documentation, including the certified letters proving prior notification. The claims adjuster sounded impressed by my thoroughness. "Most people do not document nearly this well," she noted. "It makes our job much easier." Within the week, a formal letter from my insurance company was sent to both Karen personally and the HOA board, outlining the property damage claim and the documented evidence of repeated, willful trespass following formal notification. Simultaneously, James filed the paperwork for a civil suit against both Karen and the HOA, citing ongoing trespass, property damage, and harassment. Each document was another seed planted, another root taking hold. The harvest would come in its time. For now, I continued my quiet documentation. Every incursion, every dismissive comment, every attempt to assert control over my property. The cameras recorded day and night, building an irrefutable record. Karen believed she was winning the battle because I was no longer confronting her directly. She mistook patience for surrender. But farmers understand what city people often forget. The most powerful forces work silently, beneath the surface, unseen until the moment they emerge with unstoppable momentum. Power built on fear is inherently fragile. It requires constant maintenance, constant displays of authority to remain intact. Karen's influence over the HOA and its members depended on no one questioning her decisions or methods, but questions were beginning to arise. I first noticed the shift 3 weeks after filing the civil suit. Mark Wilson, the neighbor who had criticized my attitude, approached me as I collected my mail. "Look, I want you to know not everyone agrees with how things are being handled," he said, glancing over his shoulder as if concerned about being overheard. "Karen does not speak for all of us." "What changed?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "The legal letters, the insurance claims. People are worried about liability, about their premiums going up if the HOA gets sued successfully. Self-interest, not moral awakening. Still, it was a start." Later that week, an unmarked envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside were printed emails between Karen and the HOA board members discussing strategic use of buffer zones and asserting community rights to adjacent properties. More concerning were budget documents showing thousands of dollars allocated for community event parking expansion, with references to using my property specifically. The anonymous sender had included a note: "This is wrong, not everyone supports this." The documents proved what I had suspected all along. This was never accidental, never innocent. Karen had deliberately targeted my land as an extension of HOA territory from the beginning. But now, her own people were turning against her. I provided the new evidence to James, who added it to our growing case file. "This is the smoking gun," he said. "Proves prior intent and willful disregard for property rights." Karen must have sensed the shifting tide. At the next HOA meeting, she proposed new bylaws specifically targeting hostile neighboring properties. The amendments would create a fund for legal defense against nuisance complaints, and officially designate all land bordering the development as community interest zones, regardless of ownership. But for the first time, she faced open opposition. Several board members questioned the legality, others worried about the financial exposure. The facade of unanimous support was crumbling. I decided it was time to widen the cracks. With James's guidance, I compiled a summary document of all evidence gathered: photographs, videos, internal HOA communications, damage assessments, and shared it with every homeowner in the Meadow Springs development. I included a simple cover letter explaining that while I held no ill will toward residents, I would defend my property rights against unauthorized use. The response was immediate and divided. Some residents doubled down, embracing Karen's narrative that I was an unfriendly holdout hampering community growth. But many more were concerned, even apologetic. People who had parked on my land unknowingly now understood they had been misled. The local newspaper picked up the story. Rural Property Rights versus HOA Expansion ran as a front-page headline in the county weekly. The reporter contacted me for comment, and I provided only facts, no emotional appeals. The resulting article painted a clear picture of systematic encroachment and misrepresentation. Karen attempted damage control through an emergency HOA newsletter, describing me as aggressively litigious, and the situation as a simple misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But her words rang hollow against the documented evidence now widely circulated. The final blow to her authority came when the HOA's insurance company declined to cover legal defense costs for the civil suit, citing willful misconduct exclusions in their policy. Board members would potentially be personally liable for damages unless they settled. I could see Karen's kingdom crumbling from across the street. Cars no longer appeared on my property. The bold incursions stopped completely. HOA members began avoiding Karen at community functions. Power, once questioned, is nearly impossible to fully restore. As summer turned to early fall, I received another anonymous envelope, this one containing minutes from a closed-door HOA board meeting. Karen's leadership was under formal review. Several members had motioned for her removal as president, citing reckless endangerment of the association's financial stability. She was no longer directing traffic. She was fighting for survival. And for the first time since this began, I felt the balance of power shift decisively. Not because I had fought harder, but because I had fought smarter. Because I had allowed Karen's own actions to become the evidence against her. The land between us lay quiet now. No trespassing vehicles, no community overflow, just empty space marked by invisible lines that suddenly everyone could see clearly. Boundaries restored through patience and persistence rather than rage. The next phase would require neither. The county courthouse stood as it had for generations, solid limestone and purpose. I straightened my tie as I climbed the steps, legal files tucked under my arm. James walked beside me confident but not cocky. We had prepared for months, every document organized, every claim supported by evidence. There would be no emotional appeals today, only facts. Karen arrived with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman from the city who specialized in real estate law. Karen wore a conservative blue suit, her usual confident smile replaced by something tighter, more forced. She avoided my gaze as we gathered in the hallway outside the courtroom. Judge Michaels was known for his efficiency and no-nonsense approach. The hearing began promptly at 9. James presented our case methodically, the cease and desist letters, the photographic evidence, the video footage, the internal HOA documents showing deliberate targeting of my property, the damage assessments. Your Honor, this is not a misunderstanding or a neighborly dispute, James concluded. This is a clear pattern of willful trespass and property damage following explicit prohibition. The defendant not only continued these violations herself, but encouraged and directed others to do the same. Karen's attorney attempted to paint the situation as a simple community misunderstanding. This is about reasonable accommodation between neighbors. My client believed there was an implied easement for overflow parking during limited community events. Once she understood Mr. Mitchell's objections, steps were taken to address his concerns. Judge Michaels removed his glasses. Counselor, the evidence shows your client received formal written notice prohibiting access, then proceeded to direct dozens of vehicles onto the plaintiff's property the very next weekend. That does not suggest misunderstanding. It suggests deliberate disregard. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small. The ruling came by early afternoon. The court found in my favor on all counts. Karen and the HOA were ordered to pay damages for crop destruction, irrigation system repairs, and legal fees. A permanent injunction was issued prohibiting any HOA member from entering my property without explicit written permission. Most significantly, Judge Michaels ordered the HOA to issue a formal correction to all members. clarifying that they had no rights or easements to my farm under any circumstances. Property boundaries are not suggestions, he stated firmly. They are legal demarcations protected by law regardless of convenience or community desires. As we exited the courtroom, I caught Karen's eye briefly. There was no triumph in that moment for me, only resolution. She looked away quickly, huddling with her attorney and several grim-faced HOA board members who had attended the hearing. The local newspaper covered the verdict. Television stations from the city sent reporters for the evening news. What had started as a personal boundary dispute had evolved into a public reckoning about property rights and HOA overreach. I gave brief, factual statements when asked, focusing on the principle rather than the person. Within days, the fallout became evident across the street. An emergency HOA meeting was called. From my porch, I could see cars filling their community center parking lot, staying strictly within their boundaries this time. The meeting lasted for hours. The next morning, a formal notice appeared on the development's bulletin board and in every mailbox. Karen Whitfield had been removed as HOA president, effective immediately. The board issued a formal apology for the unauthorized use of neighboring properties and promised a comprehensive review of all HOA policies. Karen's public disgrace was complete when the county controller opened an investigation into HOA financial practices during her tenure based on information that emerged during discovery. Questions arose about reimbursements she had received for community events held partially on my property without permission or rental agreements. I took no pleasure in her downfall. Justice is not about destruction but restoration. My goal had never been to ruin Karen, but to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The boundaries, physical and principal, that had been so casually dismissed. As fall settled over the farm, bringing cooler air and earlier sunsets, I sat on my porch watching the quiet return. No engines revving on my eastern field. No strangers wandering across my property line. Just the sound of wind through corn stalks that had somehow survived despite the damage. Resilient, like the land itself. The peace I had sought was finally within reach. Not given, but earned through steadfast defense of what mattered. There is something profoundly satisfying about working land that is truly yours. Not just legally, but in every sense. Each furrow feels more meaningful. Each seed planted more purposeful. After the court victory, I threw myself into restoring what had been damaged during Karen's campaign of encroachment. I repaired the irrigation system properly, replacing cracked pipes and broken connectors. I replanted areas where crops had been crushed beyond recovery. Most importantly, I installed proper fencing, not just marker posts or rope, but actual 4-foot fencing with gates that I could lock. Clear, immovable boundaries that would remain regardless of who lived across the street. The fence was not meant to isolate. It was meant to define. To establish what was mine so that respect could flow naturally from recognition rather than confrontation. As the weeks passed, a curious thing happened. Neighbors from the development began to approach me differently. Not with entitlement or dismissal, but with genuine interest and sometimes even contrition. Emily Parker, who lived at the corner house closest to my farm, brought over a homemade apple pie one afternoon. "I parked on your land during the spring gala," she admitted. "I did not realize it was private property. Karen told us it was community overflow. I wanted to apologize properly." Mark Wilson offered to help when he saw me setting fence posts one weekend. "Least I can do after being part of the problem," he said as we worked side by side. Even the new HOA president, Robert Chen, made a point of introducing himself and establishing clear communication. "We want to be good neighbors in the true sense of the word," he explained, "with clear boundaries and mutual respect." I accepted these gestures for what they were, attempts to rebuild what had been broken. Not just fences, but community trust. I had never wanted isolation, only acknowledgement of what was rightfully mine. As for Karen, her presence diminished steadily. Her perfectly manicured lawn grew slightly less perfect. Her community involvement ceased entirely. Neighbors reported that she rarely left her house except for essential errands. Then one rainy Tuesday in late October, A moving truck appeared in her driveway. I watched from my kitchen window as professional movers carried furniture and boxes out of the house she had once ruled from like a private fiefdom. Karen supervised silently, a raincoat pulled tight around her shoulders, her expression unreadable from this distance. By evening, the truck was gone. So was her luxury SUV. A for sale sign appeared in her front yard the next morning, already dripping with autumn rain. I felt no satisfaction in her departure, no vindication, only the quiet recognition that actions have consequences, and principles matter not because they win battles, but because they define who we are when battles end. Her house sold well below market value the following month. A young family moved in, parents with two small children who waved enthusiastically whenever they saw me working in the fields. They knew nothing of the conflict that had preceded their arrival. For them, the fence was simply part of the landscape, not a testament to a boundary war. That winter brought heavy snow and peaceful nights. I spent evenings by the fireplace Margaret and I had built together, looking through old photographs and feeling her presence more clearly than I had in years. She would have handled the Karen situation with more grace, perhaps, but I like to think she would have approved of my persistence in protecting what we had built together. When spring returned, I planted corn again in the eastern field, the same field that had once been crushed under tires and treated as expendable. I took special care with those rows, checking them daily as the first green shoots emerged from the soil. One evening, as the sun set over a peaceful landscape properly divided between neighbors who now understood boundaries, I stood at the fence line looking both ways. To one side, the development with its manicured lawns and identical rooflines. To the other, my farm with its weathered barn and fields stretching to the horizon. Different worlds existing side by side, neither encroaching upon the other. This was victory, not dominance but coexistence on proper terms. Not surrender of what matters, but the establishment of clear lines that allow genuine respect to grow. I ran my hand along the fence post, feeling the solid wood beneath my fingers. Boundaries matter, not because they keep people out, but because they define what must be protected, what deserves to be honored, what cannot be casually dismissed or conveniently rewritten. The land knows. The land remembers. Long after Karen and I are gone, these boundaries will remain invisible lines made visible through the courage to defend them. That is the true legacy worth fighting for. As darkness settled over Willow Creek Farm, I walked back toward the house Margaret and I had shared, the porch light guiding me home across land that was, without question, entirely mine.